I think what people tend to forget, and I know this will sound a little bit weird, but the A7IV is actually the worst best camera that Sony makes. Hey, what's up? My name's Jed. Thanks so much for stopping by the channel. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. Anyway, this video, I've fought this script in my head and on paper like 50 different times. I just really wanted to go with my gut, and my gut kind of tells me that most people are going to compare this camera to the A7S III rather than the A7 III, which it actually succeeds. And as someone who's used an A7S III for the past 18 months since it came out, I feel like I'm in pretty good stead to actually compare these two cameras. And it's because of that I think we should preface this whole review by saying, first off, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you go and do so, and if you don't, I'll hunt you down and give you a hug.
I will find you.
And the other reason, I think when we come to the A7IV, it's really important that people's expectations are in line with this camera. Anyway, let me set the scene, the Sony scene. See what I did there? Sony has a range of different camera lines. You've got the R series, which stands for resolution, and this is a photography first camera. You've got the S series, which stands for sensitivity, and that is a low light performance video camera. You've got the A9, and that's all about sport, speed, and wildlife. Then you have the alpha of all alphas. That is the A1, and that takes all the best bits from all those cameras, just meshes it into a powerhouse camera. It's these four bodies that make up the hierarchy of the Sony Alpha pyramid, if you will. Then just below that pyramid, what we find is the A7 lineup. This is the worst best cameras that Sony makes. This is the entry to full frame. I know there's technically the A7SIII, but because that's just a rehoused A7 III, we're gonna leave that out today. So yes, technically that is the worst best, but for today's argument, we're talking about the A7IV. Just like the A1, the A7IV takes different parts from all these cameras to complete itself. However, unlike the A1, instead of taking the whole feature, it might only take part of it. But that's what makes this camera a hybrid camera. It's a jack of all trades and a master of none. It's got a finger in enough pies to be its own flavor.
This is a tasty burger.
I know this review might seem a little bit out of order, but when I review something, I really want to review it from my shoes and see how this would fit into my professional workflow. But at the same time, I'm also trying to be fair and not treat everything like a pro body. Because more to the point, this camera isn't a pro body. It's aimed at enthusiasts and hobbyists. But in saying that, I guarantee that every Sony shooter that does weddings will have one of these cameras, largely because of its price, and it can cater to both photo and video needs. Also, please understand, I'm not saying that to be a pro, you need to have a pro body, because by that argument, there'll be so many pros who are not pro. Keep in mind, every company has one camera that they classify a true pro body, the A1, the 1DX, the Z9, etc. A pro is someone who's working daily in that space and that's their primary income, and most of these people tend to have specialized gear in each area that they need. And that's the last reason why this is more a consumer camera. So that sentiment kind of flows over to this next point, which is I've seen a few people complaining online about it doesn't do 4K 120, it doesn't have HD 240, and it's got a crop in 4K 60. There are two types of people making these complaints. The first type is whingers. No matter what you can do, you won't be able to please them. If you gave them 4K 120, they would want 4K 240. And the ironic thing, they were never going to buy this camera in the first place. The second type of customer is a tight ass.
Ignorant, tight ass club.
Okay, maybe that's a bit rough because I know everyone's financial situation is different, but if you're making these complaints, you're either an A7S III or an A1 customer. You just don't want to spend the money. Unfortunately, in this industry, stuff is expensive. If you or your business requires a certain sort of quality, you just need to pay for it. And keep in mind, no company is going to release the best camera that kills everything else for $4 grand. And that's why the more expensive cameras are the prices that they are. I actually think that Sony did a really good job at not pissing off their customers from other camera lines by cannibalizing their own products. So good job with that one. So that might have sounded a little bit negative, but I just want to have a little bit of perspective on this review before we dive into it. But don't fear, it's a solid camera. Anyway, let's start off with my absolute favorite feature of the A7IV, and I don't say that lightly. Focus breathing compensation. Focus breathing compensation gives you roughly a 1.1 times crop, performs some sort of digital wizardry, and removes focus breathing.
You're a wizard, Harry.
If you don't know what focus breathing is, it's when objects appear to change size or move when the focus is shifting. Focus breathing, or rather the lack of, is one of the reasons that cinema glass can get so expensive. It helps images look a lot more natural and just removes some distraction. Now obviously DSLR and mirrorless lenses can't compete with cine glass for their character, and they have that digital look to them, but this is a huge step in the right direction. I don't know how they do it, but I'm absolutely pumped about it. If you watch any of my videos shot in here, they're all shot on the 24mm G Master. This is my talking head lens. I love this lens and it's awesome, but it breathes like an absolute bitch. You know the whiny douchebags I'm talking about? I will absolutely turn into one of those if this doesn't get included into the A7S III later on, because it's a video feature and that's a video centric camera, which is higher in the line. So I do sort of expect that. Speaking of video, let's get across all that side of things and we'll move on to photos later. The 4K video is solid. It's downscaled from 7K. So in theory, it should be better than the A7S III. We get the same 10-bit 422 S-Log 3 and S-Cinetone that we find in the A7S III, and that should keep a lot of people happy. Now I can tell you what I think's best, but let's do some side-by-side blind tests. Ultimately, seeing is believing, so see what you think and let me know in the comments how many did you get right. Now for me personally, the biggest downside of this camera is no 4K 120 and crop factor when we go into 4K 60. So to be real, I find crop factor pretty annoying. I've not had it forced on me before, like I've used APS-C cameras and I've shot Super 35 or had the ability to put it into Super 35, but I've never had access to the full frame and then been told in this mode, you don't have that access. I know 4K 120 on the S3 has a 1.1 times crop, but you don't notice that. For me, the way I look at it, if I've got a shot in 4K 24, it looks great, and then I go, you know what, I wouldn't mind getting 4K 60 of this, and then I put it into that, and all of a sudden my composition, everything's different. Now, if I've got a set build out or a tripod set up, everything needs to move or the lens needs to change. And sometimes that can be the difference in missing the light or missing the shot altogether. This goes back to what I was saying earlier in the video. If you're like me and you want 4K 120 and you don't want crop in 4K 60, then you are probably an A7S III or an A1 customer. And that's exactly what I am, and maybe I'm just proving my own point. Another downside on the A7 IV for video is going to be the rolling shutter performance. If you're unaware of what rolling shutter is, it's the camera's ability to keep straight lines looking straight and not looking like jello when the camera's moving from left to right. Sony's mirrorless cameras traditionally have pretty bad rolling shutter, so when the A7S III came out, it was a really nice welcome surprise to everyone how good the rolling shutter performance was. Unfortunately, on the A7 IV, it is a step back. Another feature we get is focus mapping. Do I like it? I don't know. I think if you ask me right now, I'd say no, but I think it's something that long term, if you use, you'll get used to and you'll start to enjoy. So I'm not going to write it off just yet. Basically, focus mapping is a new type of focus peaking. Everything that is in focus will appear in focus and normal. Everything that's defocused in the foreground will appear red, and everything that's defocused in the background will appear blue. It kind of has a bit of a weird Tetris feel to it, and I personally don't love traditional focus peaking, so I think with a bit of time getting used to this, I might enjoy it. But for now, I'd say I'm on the fence. As I said before, we get the same 10-bit 422 S-Log 3 and S-Cinetone as the S3. The one thing we don't get is the dual gain ISO that the S3 has. If you don't know what that is, it means our base ISOs are 640 and 12,800. So that means when we're shooting in S-Log 3, we can have our ISO on the S3 up at 12,800 with zero noise. And that's super handy to have. While over on the A7 IV, our base ISO is 800, so if we are going to want to shoot S-Log 3 in the middle of the day, we are definitely going to want to take some ND filters with us. If you are going to buy an A7 IV, never fear, because Sony is always renowned for having good quality low light sensors. Over the last 18 months, some cameras have come out and they've had overheating issues, Canon R5. Pow, pow, pow. And I really wanted to know, does the A7 IV have overheating? When I was recording the intro for my MacBook review, which I don't think is out just yet, I had the A7 IV as the top-down camera. I was filming in standard 4K 24, and this actually overheated in 6.5 minutes. Hey, it's me from a different video. This is the M1 MacBook I'm trying to unbox. Up here, I'm filming on the A7 IV. But what I found out so far, 6 minutes of recording, long GOP, not even all eye, and it's overheated. I did go back through the settings and check, and as standard, the power temperature setting is set to standard, so I have changed it to high. I'll do a little bit more testing with that. Back to filming this video. I was pretty annoyed at the time, but what I didn't realize is the internal temperature warning was set to standard, so it is going to overheat much quicker. I ran this test again just to see how it would go. 10.5 minutes had it overheated in just a room temperature environment. So naturally, I was curious as to how this would perform if I changed the internal temperature warning to high. So I put it side by side with the A7S III, ran the exact same settings, same test. In a room temperature environment, both cameras got over an hour and 10 minutes of recording before the first batch went flat, and I figured I'm just going to kill the test there. What I did find interesting is that when I was matching settings on the A7S III, I'd never actually, in my whole time of owning the camera, changed the internal temperature setting from standard to high, which I found pretty interesting because in the whole time I've owned this camera, a year and a half, I've had 2 overheat warnings. I've never had it shut down on me, but the 2 days I did get warnings, I was in baking sun recording high quality all day. So for me, the way I look at this is, do they both overheat? I suppose. Is one better than the other? I think the A7S III is going to be more reliable. Now that I've swapped it over to the high temperature setting, I almost don't expect to see any sort of overheating on the S3 at all. If we do get another hot day before this video goes live, I'll make sure to do another overheating test in the sun as well. Hey, what's up? It's Future Me. This is a few days after I recorded all the previous stuff. Today is 32 degrees Celsius, which is 89.6 Fahrenheit, and I thought I'd run some more tests. While today's a hot day, it's also kind of one of those weird muggy days. We don't get super humid down here, but still a bit of humidity going around. It was sun and it was cloud, so it wasn't constant sun the whole time baking on the cameras, but it was an even mix. Both cameras had all the same settings, 4K SI 24 frames max quality. They were both recording to the same sort of SD card, V90 Angelbird. And this is how the test went. The A7 IV had its first overheating warning come up at 27 minutes and 55 seconds. And then that led to a total shutdown at 30 minutes and 52 seconds. However, over on the A7S III, we got 1 hour, 12 minutes and 49 seconds before the camera ran out of space. So it didn't actually overheat, nor did it get even an overheating warning. It just ran out of space on the memory card. So that's a pretty safe bet. If you're looking for a camera that's not going to overheat, go for the A7S III. But once again, that goes back to paying a premium for a camera that's specialized to do what you want it to do. If you're thinking that the A7 IV did a bad job compared to the A7S III, spare a thought for Sony's previous generations of cameras. This shows how far they've come. I recorded the whole test on the A7R IV, and I recorded in lowest quality 1080p because I wanted to make sure I got the whole test. I went to check on the test twice while it was recording, and both times the camera had overheated. Luckily for me, the third time it powered through to the end, and that gave me all the visual recording of all the significant moments through this test. So maybe the overheating on the A7 IV is not too bad anyway. Especially considering it's not a video focused camera. Remember that. Lastly, another point of interest, this has the vari-angle flip screen, which some people are so dead set about loving.
Start with this, huh? Flip screen.
The best thing is the flip out.
This bit is new.
For filmmaking, I absolutely hate it. For vlogging, I absolutely love it. For photos, I'll take any style of screen. I've said it before and I'll say it again, the Panasonic S1H has the best style of screen of any camera out there on the market. A quick summary of the video performance before we move over to photos. If any of the things that I mentioned annoy you, the lack of 4K 120, crop in 4K 60, no HD 240, then this is not the camera for you, unless you're using it as a B or a C camera and you need some photo capabilities too. If they do annoy you, then you should be looking at an A7S III, FX3, FX6, A1, etc. But if you're looking for a solid B or C cam with photo capabilities and solid 4K 24, this is a good choice. Also, it is important to note, while I personally have been comparing this to the A7S III, if you compare the A7 IV to the A7 III, it is a huge step up.
That's a huge.
Alright, moving on to photos. First thing, the focus. The focus inherits the focusing system from the A1, the A9. This thing is sticky, it is absolute glue. We're kind of at the point where if we're complaining about focus in cameras, we're just looking for something to complain about. Sure, the AI can get a little bit better and detect different things, but my goodness, it's so damn good. There's not a terrible amount of things to say about the photo side of the camera. It just performs really well. I think 33 megapixels is a bit of a sweet spot for resolution, flexibility, printability, but also for your file management, because storage is a very real issue. Having uncompressed raw files in the 66 megabyte range is pretty handy. Ergonomically, from its predecessor, it does take a bit of a change. It inherits the same body as the A7S III. It's got dual card slots, with one of them taking CF Express Type A and UHS 2. With this camera, I think most people will use SD cards. I don't really think there's a need for a CF Express Type A slot. But if you've got the A7S III, I'd invest in at least one of those cards and then have the rest SD. If you're someone that uses your exposure compensation a fair bit, you'll notice that this dial is a little bit different. Instead of having small marked increments, this is a free spinning wheel that can be customized to whatever you want. Now this is handy because the A7 IV is less consistent in hitting white balance, so we can customize that to our white balance and adjust it on the go. And you got a little lock on there, so you're able to lock that off as well. Now the big ergonomic change that I am pumped about and I've been asking for so long is the quick mode to change from photo to video mode. Up on the mode dial, we can flick from photo, video, and S&Q mode. While I'm pumped that Sony is innovating, I'm also kind of baffled that I made it out of the design shop like this.
Sometimes it may be good, sometimes it may be shit.
In my eyes, S&Q should be in the middle, and that way it's easy to rip from photo straight across to video. I do find when I'm swapping from photo to video, sometimes I'll go too far and it's kind of takes a little bit of jiggling to get back straight into the middle. This is just an ease of use thing, and hey, maybe that's something to look forward to on an A7V. Another thing to consider about this camera, it doesn't have a locking mode on the mode dial. And if you've got fat little sausage fingers like me, you'll find that at times when you're swapping from photo to video mode, you might actually bump out of manual into aperture priority or whatever. It's a cursed life. I think for me, with the A7 IV's significant video bump, the incredible autofocus quality, and the rise in resolution, this kind of renders the A7R III a completely dead camera in my personal opinion. These cameras aren't terribly different in price, and for sacrificing 9 megapixels, what you get in return for buying this camera instead, it's a no-brainer. 33 megapixels gives you plenty of wiggle room to do all the playing and all the printing that you want to do, and if you really need more, they've got the A7R IV, which is 61 megapixels. And to be honest, 33 megapixels is way too many for the average person anyway. Another feature they've brought to this camera, which I'm really excited about, it was the best feature of the EOS R when that launched, is the option to have your shutter come down when you're changing lenses. Now this will protect your sensor from dirt and dust. You still don't want to touch that shutter because that's going to be very expensive to replace, but at least it gives you the option to try and keep your sensor a little bit cleaner. So the A7 IV does have quite a few cool different operational updates, and I personally would expect these to get implemented into the more premium models soon. I'll be waiting for that firmware update, Sony. I suppose my concluding thoughts on this camera is it's a solid camera. It's the best camera that Sony makes, and it's aimed for hobbyists and enthusiasts. And although, like I said, I think every Sony shooter that does weddings is going to have one of these cameras because it is exceptional at both photo and video work. And speaking of hobbyists, most hobbyists or enthusiasts won't even come close to using all of this camera's potential. And if in any of this you found a deal breaker, there's probably one of two things that's happening. You're either a pro and you need to buy more appropriate specialized gear, or you think that you need to have a McLaren to drive 60 miles an hour to go to work on the freeway. Whereas you can get those exact same results getting to work on time with a family sedan. All the gear, no idea. You know what I mean. It's honestly a great camera, and if you gave me $4,000 Australian, you told me to walk into the camera store and buy a camera body, this is going to be the one that I'd leave the store with. In saying that, would I use one if it was in my kit? Absolutely. Am I going to get one? Absolutely not. I've said it before in previous videos, the A1 is the play, and that is still very much going to happen. I'm just trying to save for it because it's an expensive camera. It's pennies.
Look, a penny!
Cool, so that's it for this one. Time for a suggestion. It's going to be Bo Burnham Inside. It's on Netflix. Absolutely awesome. I was just blown away with how good it was. I haven't left something feeling that inspired for a long time, so definitely go and watch that, and maybe even listen to it on Apple Music or Spotify. I think I'm driving Rosie crazy because I am listening to it quite a bit. I absolutely loved it. I give it 10 out of 10. I thought it was brilliant. What he was able to do, how we did it, and just watch it. Just watch it. Let me know in the comments down below if you're going to cop an A7 IV, and while you're down there, give it a big fat thumbs up. Let the algorithm know that this video isn't completely useless. And if you're new here, please go and hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.